Greetings, everyone. My name is Alexandra Lessem. I'm a family nurse practitioner at North Colorado Family Medicine in Greeley, and I am here today to talk to you about the nutrition and the power of plants. I have my certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell University and also am certified in lifestyle medicine. And this is sort of my passion and something I think is really very beneficial for so many of us. So I'm delighted to be talking to you about this topic today. And I hope you find it interesting and learn some good information that you can incorporate into your life. So to start with our outline, we'll address what's wrong with the standard American diet, which dietary pattern is best, how do we know that's the best, will I get all the nutrients I need if changing how I eat? What can I do to eat better? What might I notice or feel? And where do we go from here? So to start with, we can talk about what's wrong with the standard American diet. And there are, in fact, many things that are wrong with this diet and the way that we eat and the way that we have come to eat over the past several years. Among them, we are eating more than we ever used to. Caloric intake has increased dramatically over the past several years. As you can see, 23% between 1970 and 2010, and that has continued to rise since then. So simply, we are eating more food than we ever used to and more than most of us need. Refined flours, fats, and oils comprise 46.6 or almost half of our total calories. And so this comes in the form of processed foods and cookies and pastries and pizza and hot dogs and some of those things we saw on the previous slide, that we're getting all of our food from a lot of our calories, almost half of our calories, from these foods that are really very poor in nutritional content and are not providing us with the nutrients and vitamins that our bodies really need to survive and to thrive. Americans eat 21.9 pounds of cheese per person, which is a huge amount of cheese. A lot of this also is in the form of pizza, and it is a very high source of saturated fat, the highest source of saturated fat in our dietary choices in what we could eat. And that is problematic for leading to increased rates of heart disease and atherosclerosis and increased risk of heart attack and stroke and peripheral vascular disease and all sorts of circulatory disorders. Fruit and vegetable intake comprises under 8%, 7.9% of daily caloric intake, and that actually has decreased, as you see, from 1970. It was not great in 1970, and it has continued to get worse since then. 76% of Americans do not meet fruit intake recommendations, and 87% do not meet vegetable intake recommendations. And so people are eating, again, lots of processed foods, lots of fat, lots of sugar, and very little in the way of fruits and vegetables, which are very important for our health. And this has implications. As we see here, the obesity rates have been rising pretty steadily since about the 70s, or late 70s, early 80s. Overweight, interestingly, has remained relatively stable, but obesity has climbed significantly in men and in women. And also, as you see, extreme obesity, so that would be defined as a body mass index of greater than 40, was virtually non-existent prior to 1976 or 1980 and has climbed pretty steadily since that time. And that is a very concerning trend for adults, and notably for children as well, is a very big concern for health impacts for them as children and as they become adults. Also, the way that we eat has huge impacts on other chronic illnesses and causes of death. Cardiovascular disease has been and remains the leading cause of death for men and women annually, accounting for about 800,000 deaths a year. And that has come pretty unchanged for several years. It's come down a little bit due to improvements in treatment and medications and stenting and bypasses and all these things we can do to try to treat cardiovascular disease. So people are not dying quite as much as they used to, but the prevalence has not declined at all. And to sort of put this in perspective, as far as the cause of death, people think of breast cancer for women as being a large cause of death, which it certainly is, and we'll talk about cancer in just a moment. But breast cancer kills about 30 to 40,000 women every year, and cardiovascular disease kills about 400,000. So it's about 10 times as many women die from cardiovascular disease as from breast cancer every year. Diabetes is another huge problem and causes lots of illness and death for many Americans. 30.3 million Americans had diagnosed or undiagnosed in 2015, about a quarter of adults over the age of 65. And there are many, many others who have what's called prediabetes, so not quite at the threshold for diabetes yet, but have impaired insulin function and are at very high risk of developing diabetes, which is concerning. And again, here with children, there are becoming many, many more cases of type 2 diabetes among children, which used to be pretty much non-existent. Type 2 diabetes was thought to be a disease of middle to late adulthood, and more we are seeing that it is affecting people in their late or adolescence, teens, early 20s, 30s, young people, and this is very, very closely tied to the rise in obesity and to, again, the dietary choices that we are making. And cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States, causing almost 600,000 deaths annually. So we talked about breast cancer, many other types of cancer, including breast cancer, colon cancer, and some other reproductive prostate cancer, are very closely associated with diet as well. We don't think of it quite as directly linked to diet as perhaps cardiovascular disease or diabetes, but there is quite a bit of information showing that what we eat significantly impacts our risk of developing cancer and also our prognosis and mortality rate if we are diagnosed with cancer. The odds that we will survive are affected by our nutrition. So which dietary pattern is best? If eating lots of pizza and cheeseburgers and pastries and cookies and things like that is not best, what should we be eating? And the answer, quite simply, is that truly the best overall diet for our health and longevity is what would be called a whole food plant-based diet, or predominantly whole food plant-based diet. So a whole food plant-based diet is a diet that includes minimally processed foods from plant sources. The foundation of the diet: whole grains, legumes or beans, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and herbs. There are the four core food groups: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes or beans. And the idea is that the majority of your food comes from these plant-based sources. So if it grows in the ground or grows on a tree, then it is great to eat. If it's something that comes from an animal, so meat or milk or eggs or even fish, there are some health risks associated with it, and so best to limit or avoid those as much as possible. The other important part of this is the whole food part. And so what that means is that you're eating foods as close to their original source as possible. And so if you're thinking about an apple, the whole food apple would be you go to the tree, you pick it off the tree, you pop it in your mouth. That's pretty much as natural and as whole food as it can possibly be. As that apple gets, turned into applesauce, that's moving from that a little bit. As it turns into an apple pie, you're a little bit further from that. You're adding in fat and sugar and things like that. And as it gets moved even further into an apple candy or something like that, it may have some tiny amount of apple in it, but basically you are not in the whole food plant-based arena anymore. So this, again, is just sort of a picture of this whole food plant-based diet, or what's called the vegan plate. We look at seeing the components of that. So you have your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains. And so by whole grains, that would mean things like brown rice, whole wheat bread, 100% whole wheat bread, barley, millet, quinoa, all kinds of different types of grains, but again, having those as close to the source as possible and trying to limit the processed grains. So white rice, white bread, things like that. Nuts and seeds are great in moderation to some degree. They have a lot of fat and a lot of calories, so if you're eating tons and tons of those, it can be challenging for weight management. And then legumes, all sorts of legumes are fabulous. So any kinds of beans, black beans, pinto beans, cannellini beans, things like that. Soy products would fit in this area, tofu or tempeh, and other types of peas as well, black-eyed peas or things like that would fit in this legume category, which provide us with lots of protein and fiber and healthful things to help our bodies. And then the essentials up here in the right would be sunlight to provide us with vitamin D, some salt. The salt is showing the iodine, that we do need iodine is an essential nutrient that we have to make sure that we're getting in our diet, and the vitamin B12, which that is something that is essential if you are eating an entirely plant-based diet. If you still are incorporating some animal products in your diet, you probably don't need to take the B12. But if you're not having any, then you do. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. And another essential that would show there would be water, drinking plenty of fluids. So how do we know that this is the best? Why do we know to say that a plant-based diet is the best diet? Do people just sit around and say, oh, that sounds good, let's say it? And no, that's not true. There are decades and decades of evidence in many different arenas showing us that plant-based diets have tremendous potential to prevent, to treat, and in many cases to reverse these chronic diseases that we are plagued with. Here is an example of a picture showing us a very clear example of this. And so what this is, Dr. Dean Ornish, who you may have heard of, has done a tremendous amount of work in the plant-based diet arena. And he did several studies in the 90s where he would place people on a low-fat, predominantly plant-based diet and monitor them also in a program incorporating stress reduction and physical activity, and monitor them over a period of time. And these were all people who had established severe coronary artery disease at baseline and would qualify potentially for stents or for bypass surgery, but instead opted for this lifestyle intervention in place of the more invasive interventions. And he had great success with them. This photo actually is from a person who was not directly involved in one of his studies, but was a colleague of his. This gentleman was a surgeon, and he was very healthy. He was 44 years old. He had what we would consider a normal cholesterol of 156 total cholesterol and an LDL of 97. He was not diabetic. He didn't have high blood pressure. He didn't smoke. No family history. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he had a heart attack, which was a shock to him. He went to his doctor, and they showed that he had these severe blockages in his left anterior descending coronary artery, so the main artery providing blood to the bulk of the heart. As you can see in picture A, where it's all skinny and crinkled there, I guess. And because of where it was and because of the duration, they said that it was not a candidate for stenting or for bypass. And so he knew that Dr. Ornish was doing all this work, and he went to see him and said, you know, what can I do? Can I be involved in this? And Dr. Ornish, of course, said, absolutely. And so this gentleman, he was resolute about his diet. He adopted a complete plant-based diet. He continued his regular exercise. And then the second picture, picture B, is after 32 months. No medication, no statins or cholesterol medication or anything like that for this gentleman. And after 32 months, you can see in picture B on the right that his artery had opened up. It was beautiful and full and open and pristine and healthy. His total cholesterol had dropped to 89, and his LDL had dropped to 38. So this is one very nice pictorial example of how a plant-based diet can have dramatic effects on a person's body. There are many other studies and evidence supporting this. There is a lower risk of mortality among those following a more plant-based diet, reduced risk of cancer. As we talked about many kinds of cancer, the most robust evidence for this is for breast and reproductive cancers, so breast, prostate, endometrial cancer, as well as cancers of the gastrointestinal tract. So stomach cancer, colon cancer, colorectal cancer, things like that can be very dramatically reduced by greater adherence to a plant-based diet. Reduced risk and or reversal of cardiovascular disease, as we saw the picture previously, and there have been many other studies to confirm this and to show that a predominantly plant-based diet not only can reverse cardiovascular disease, but can dramatically reduce the risk of getting it and reduces other markers, inflammatory markers and cholesterol and things like that. And then reduced risk of developing diabetes or and better control of diabetes if somebody has developed it. The risk of developing diabetes is about, looking at studies, about 70% less by following a plant-based diet. And then those who do have diabetes oftentimes can reduce or get off many of their medications through greater adherence or to adopting a predominantly plant-based diet. And a lot of this is related to lower BMI or weight loss, that those who are following a predominantly plant-based diet are less likely to be overweight or obese. And if they change to it, lose weight, which then helps to control the diabetes. Other benefits, rather than those of these most prevalent chronic conditions that you can see here: decreased pain with arthritis, reduced risk of early menopause, which a lot of this is believed to be the cause of the reduced risk of breast cancer, relief of dysmenorrhea or menstrual pain, improvement in migraine headache pain, reduced risk of autoimmune diseases, so things like MS and rheumatoid arthritis, less disability, fatigue, and pain among those with multiple sclerosis, more favorable gastrointestinal microbiota. And this is a huge area, and we're learning more and more about this every day, and believed to be really a big part of this, with decreasing the inflammatory microbiome in the gut, which helps to decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease and these autoimmune and chronic inflammatory conditions, as well as decreasing the prevalence of carcinogenic compounds in the blood that come from eating meat, and improved mental health. So decreased anxiety and depression in many cases through adopting a predominantly plant-based diet. Will I get all the nutrients I need? This is something that everybody worries about when they are thinking about giving up meat or giving up dairy, or things like that we've been taught for many years that are essential for our health. How will I do this? How will I get my protein is the question that people really are worried about the most of anything. Good news is that all our needs, our three main nutrients, carbohydrate, fat, and protein needs, can be easily met on a plant-based diet if you are eating a variety of these whole plant foods from the different categories. So you're eating the whole grains, the vegetables, the legumes, the fruits, drinking water, those kinds of things. You will easily get what you need from those. People, as I said, the biggest concern that people have is about protein. And we'll look at that a little bit more on the next slide. But all foods have protein in them for the most part. Even watermelon has protein in it. You'd have to eat a lot of watermelon to meet your needs, but there is protein in pretty much everything we eat, and it's not the problem that people have been led to believe it is. And interestingly, vitamins, minerals, and micronutrients are more abundant in plant-based than animal-derived foods. So you're actually getting more nutrients through eating these more healthful and what would be called nutrient-dense plant-based foods. And vitamin B12, as we talked about, must be taken if you're eating an entirely plant-based diet. B12 comes from bacteria in the soil that they ferment, and they produce this bacteria, or they produce the B12. And so what happens when cattle or animals are grazing, they eat some of the soil and they get the B12 into their bodies. And then when people eat their meat or their milk, they get the B12 as a byproduct. So the alternative would be for us to eat the dirt ourselves if we wanted to do that. But a more palatable way is to take a B12 supplement. So here's looking at a protein looking at protein in a sample menu for a person, we need about 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram of protein per day. And so that would be this 54 to 68 grams of protein for a 150-pound person. And so you can look here, and here is a menu that is met quite easily with a pretty normal diet, normal meals, right? Eating some oatmeal, having a sandwich and some soup, a tofu stir fry for dinner, and some nuts and raisins, and there you are at your 58.5 grams. It doesn't require drinking protein shakes or having supplemental protein or anything like that. It really can be done just by eating this variety of foods. And the dietary guidelines and recommendations support this eating more fruits and vegetables. The 2015 guidelines were just recently updated to 2020 and still emphasize this idea of dietary patterns, eating nutrient-dense foods in different patterns, and definitely greater intake of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics say that appropriately planned vegetarian and vegan diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide benefits for the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. So this is not some fringe idea. It is well supported by the evidence and by organizations and government groups. So what can I do to eat better? One big thing would be to set some goals, to think about things that you could do to change in your life. And we talk a lot about SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic and relevant, measurable, and time-based. Oh, I said measurable at the beginning. So 2 measurables. So we can have goals. So say I will eat more fruits and vegetables, which is nice, but how are you going to measure that? How are you going to know if you have met that goal? So rather change that to say I will choose 1 new vegetable to eat for dinner on Thursday nights for the next 3 weeks. And that's something you can keep track of. Did you do it? Yes or no? And if you do, great, and you can carry on. If not, okay, how can I change to make this something that I can do? Again, I will never eat meat again. That may be fine, and some people may be able to make that and do that just right overnight. But for a lot of people, that's a challenging thing to do right away. So rather think about how you could sort of ease towards eating less meat. So I will not eat any meat or animal products on Monday for the next 4 weeks. There's a movement about meatless Mondays, and so that can be a thing that can be done. Other options, think about a specific day or a specific meal that you would cut meat or dairy out of your diet and set a goal for that. I will stop eating donuts, another great idea, but is that realistic? Is that attainable? If donuts are your very favorite food in the entire world, are you just going to stop overnight? Maybe, but rather give yourself a little leeway and think about what you can do. And again, it's easier to set positive goals rather than negative goals. So saying what you will eat instead of what you will not eat. So instead of donuts, say I will eat oatmeal with berries for breakfast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for 1 month. And then look at that after the month. Did you do that? Did you meet your goal? Does your goal need to be adapted in some way? And if you eat a donut occasionally, then okay, that hasn't interfered. You still may have met your goal if you're eating better, 3 out of 7 days. These are some great resources for you to look through. The Forks Over Knives, there's a movie, which is fabulous. That goes through a lot of this stuff and is very interesting. There's also the website here, which has all kinds of recipes and meal planning things and education and all kinds of stuff. So that is a great resource to check out. Another is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They, again, have lots of resources, lots of education. They have a program called the 21-Day Vegan Kickstart Program, where you can sign up to do a vegan or plant-based diet for 21 days, and they provide you meal plans for every day of the week, shopping lists, as well as education and motivational information. If you're interested in kind of diving right in and giving it a try for 3 weeks, that's a great resource. And the nutritionfacts.org is more of an educational resource rather than specific recipes and things like that. Dr. Greger he and his team scour the literature and come up with very short and usually very funny little videos about all array of nutritional topics. And So that is a great place to look if you want to learn more about this or about all sorts of nutritional areas. So what might I notice? Some good things you might notice if you're transitioning to a more plant-based diet would be more energy, less weight, sleeping better, mood feeling better, are the good things you might feel. Some not so good things would be some stomach and some GI distress, some more gas, and some withdrawal type symptoms. These aren't because anything is wrong with the diet, it's just because it's a big change for the diet. Typically transitioning to a more plant-based diet involves having a lot more fiber in the gut, and so that can definitely cause some issues as your body adjusts. It's not long-term, it gets better, but just sort of to be aware of that, make sure you're drinking plenty of fluids and allowing your body to sort of go through that transition. This was from my doctoral project that I had people do that vegan kickstart, follow the diet for 21 days, and they generally felt a whole lot better. So these are improvements in feeling more energy, less nervousness, feeling more calm and peaceful, more energy, and generally just felt overall better even after just 3 weeks of following the diet. They also reported that it was easier than they thought it was going to be. They thought that it was going to be hard, and it wasn't, as you can see in the comment there on the left. The one down on the right, I'm sort of in the way of it, but although I'm not fully vegan, I now appreciate the benefits of a vegan diet and am utilizing these foods more routinely in my meals. Many of them chose to continue, and again, most of them found it to be a little or much easier than they had expected. So where do we go from here? So this is where we sort of the call to action for you. What can you do? What can you take from this? Is there a goal you can set for yourself? Do you just want to learn more about it? Any of those are wonderful. As a summary, we reviewed some problems. We reviewed which dietary pattern is best, which you all hopefully know now is the whole food plant-based diet. We reviewed some of the evidence and discussed some nutritional information and provided you with some resources. So this is just sort of scratching the surface of this area. I do hope you are inspired to learn more about it. I am very happy to talk to anybody about it who would like to. So please reach out to me if you have questions. And in your case, think about how you can make one or more changes to move towards a more plant-based diet. Think about setting a goal for yourself for the next 4 weeks. Write it down, which is really important, and then hold yourself accountable if you have met that goal or not, and think about what could be done instead. And there are many references which will be included later here, but thank you so much for your time. And again, please reach out to me for any questions or ways that I can help you. Take care. Bye.